Hello, my name is Edith. I'm the legal administrator and paralegal here at the Tender Adoption Law Offices of D. Duran Cook. I would like to welcome you today and let you know that we all work together here as a team, and we look forward to getting to know you more as the day moves along. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Attorney Duran Cook, who will present valuable educational material that we hope will be helpful to you in your decision-making process.
Welcome. I'm Duran Cook. I'm one of the attorneys on the team here of the law offices of D. Duran Cook. And today we're going to talk about adoption. The idea would be to spend a few minutes right now looking at your alternatives just to make sure that when we look into the adoption in depth here, that you've looked at, one, your alternative to keep your child, or two, we don't do much of that talking here, but terminating your pregnancy. The first part of this is to really look at why you're choosing adoption versus parenting. If there was any possible way that you could choose to parent this child, I'm sure that you have been looking for those ways, and you're going to be speaking with an adoption counselor here today, and that counselor is going to help you explore the various options that you have to keep your child. If it turns out that adoption is your choice, we thank you for choosing our office to help you facilitate that. And today we are going to take steps, hopefully, to get you educated and prepared to move in that direction. From my standpoint, besides the adoption aspect, I just really, on a personal basis, want to know that I'm working with a young lady that's really explored her option of keeping the child. Adoption doesn't work if it doesn't work for you. It won't work for the child. It won't work for the adoptive parents. So, okay, let's just take a look. If you choose adoption and we're working together, what our process is here to assist you in finding a home for your unborn child. So first of all, you may have noticed in your initial contact with our office that we didn't send you a dozen adoptive parent profiles. That's a good way of accumulating information on adoptive parents, but what I found over the years is that most birth mothers find that it's not a very personal way of choosing a home for your unborn child. I mean, this is a lifetime decision. And to make it off a piece of paper with pictures and so forth, it's difficult. So we've chosen to do it on a very personal basis. So let's walk through that. You're here in our office. You'll be here, no doubt, 2 days and 1 night at a minimum. And the first day, as we talked about earlier, is going to be about this kind of education and counseling and getting clarity, if you choose adoption, on what you're looking for in adoptive parents. Because when we move forward, you will be actually choosing adoptive parents after you have met and evaluated them. Let's just say that your wish list has been passed to us and that we have now taken a look at that and looked at the adoptive parents that we have worked with and are working with that have gone through what we call a home study process. In other words, these are people that have been certified that they're an appropriate home for adoption, and they have to be approved by the court system. So let's say that you've talked about age, you've talked about religion, you've talked about lifestyle, and so now you can meet as many couples as you need to make this decision, lifetime decision. But we're going to present the couples to you one at a time and ask that you complete with each couple. We don't really, believe in pain here. And if you interview 3 couples and 2 of them are going to lose out on the opportunity to adopt your child, it's a very painful proposition for them. So if you're not 100% sure when you meet a couple that they are the right family, then it's okay. We'll just say no and we'll go on to couple number 2. Fair enough? All right, so you're going to meet a couple. Let's just say we'll take a quick look at what that looks like. It's face-to-face. I'm going to actually ask you 3 questions, or whoever facilitates the meeting will ask you 3 questions off the bat. The first one is, why are you choosing adoption? If you look at it from the adoptive parent standpoint, you know, they would never want to take a child away from a woman that really wanted to parent her child. So they come to these matching meetings, we call them, with kind of mixed emotions. They're all excited because you're sitting across from you, who's pregnant, it's going to be choosing a home for your child. On the other hand, they would never want to think that 6 months from now that you'd be in pain, or 2 years from now that you would be in pain if you choose adoption. So to get that clarified, and again, you won't be asking to meet, hopefully, a family unless you are clear that adoption is the right choice for you. So to get that clarified in their mind, we're just going to ask you up front to explain why adoption is the appropriate decision for you and not keeping the baby. And secondly, just because people aren't living with you on a day-to-day basis, go ahead and ask you about your lifestyle, drinking, drugs, cigarettes, things that could affect the fetus. And then the third thing, if the birth father isn't right there with you, then we're going to ask you about the birth father, because birth fathers have rights that need to be dealt with. So the meeting's going to go along for the better part of an hour. We're going to ask them a lot of questions that under at least California law you need to know the answer to. And then we're going to take a break and let you and your companion, whoever's with you, talk at the break. And if it's going good, and if it's going good with the adoptive parents after they've been alone for a few minutes to talk, then they'll take you to lunch. You'll be their guest, and you move kind of at your own pace at lunch. Come back 1, 2, 3 hours later. We see how everything's going at that point. If it's a go, great. We take a couple pictures, freeze that moment forever. We do more paperwork. How fun is that, huh? But in any case, then we have a little after meeting. That'll be on your second day before you go home, and the after meeting consists primarily of exchanging contact information so that you can stay in touch with one another until the time of birth, so that you'll feel hopefully warm and fuzzy the way you probably will the day you meet the adoptive parents when you give birth. And they'll need to know, so they'll be looking to you to tell them whether they're welcome in the labor and delivery arena or if they should be in the waiting lounge. They're going to look to you to advise them as to what your requests are, if any, with regard to post-birth contact. And so then when that all is done and you're on your plane or train or whatever going back home, you're going to start this weekly relationship of communication that'll culminate when the baby's born. And that's the practical way that you'll meet and choose adoptive parents. And again, if the first meeting doesn't work, you can meet as many families as you need to until you're at peace with your decision and your baby has the home that you want it to have. Let's say now you've chosen the couple, but in the process of an adoption, you do have to transfer your parental rights to the adoptive parents. It gets a little tricky educationally here to go through this because we have 50 states and every state has its own laws. So most of them are similar, but there are differences from state to state. So we'll just have to bear in mind until you meet a couple and we know where they're going to finalize their adoption. We won't know for sure the exact procedure. But in essence, I will use California, since we're here, as a guideline for you, okay? So in California, in order to transfer your parental rights, which you cannot do until you've given birth, you have to have a meeting. They call it an advisement meeting with a social worker that has extensive experience in adoption that will be assigned to you as your representative. And she will explain this process in much more detail than I am right now. But you will go through that advisement. It takes about an hour, and she will explain that you're going to sign a consent after birth and that you're going to sign it in front of her. And so you won't be surprised because you've already talked to her at least 10 days, hopefully, prior to birth. And you understand that this procedure is going to happen and you're going to be signing documents. So If you sign the document, you're eligible to sign that immediately upon discharge of the hospital. But that's really quick, and you might have some after effect with medication and so forth. So the legislature decided that they would give you 30 days if you signed the transfer of your parental rights, 30 days to cancel that transfer. Now, there's an organization of birth parents that went up to our legislature and said, ladies and gentlemen, I know you're trying to protect us, birth parents, but if you understand what we're trying to accomplish here, we want our baby to go to the home that we've chosen, and we want the baby to bond with its parents immediately. We don't want to wait 29 days. So the legislature said, you're right, I didn't really think that through. We were just trying to protect you, so why don't we do this? Why don't we say that you can waive your right, if that's the way you feel, you can waive your right to change your mind. And they said, I think that would do it. So, and a condition to waive your right to change your mind in California is that you have to have a separate meeting with an attorney that's going to tell you, basically, if you sign this form, this waiver form, that your rights have vanished at that point. So you can keep them for 30 days and they'll evaporate on the 31st day, or you can sign this form. It's up to you. But that's California law. Once you sign the waiver form or on the 31st day, then your rights, even though the adoption is not final, your rights at that point are terminated. And the birth father's rights have to be terminated, and again, depending on his participation, depending on how active he is or inactive he is in the adoption process. So I hope that helps you understand. Again, at every phase of the adoption process, you have a right to independent counseling. Whether it's that adoption service provider that I mentioned to you that was going to do the advisement, or somebody independent in your hometown, or the counselor that you met here at our office. Please know that you have a support system. You just have to reach out and ask for it. So I hope the information thus far has been helpful to you, but I can't read your mind. So we're going to take a look now at some questions, and I'm going to try and answer them that other birth mothers that have come ahead of you have asked.
Are the adoptive parents screened before coming to your office?
The screening process for adoptive parents basically is in the form of what's called a home study. And that's an extensive look at their home. They have to, come up with certified copies of their marriage certificate. They have to come up with income tax records. They have to go to the doctor, be checked out health-wise. They actually are fingerprinted, fingerprints sent to the FBI. Most states require that there's a child abuse index that has to be checked to make sure they're not on there. So in essence, to answer your question, yes, they are checked out thoroughly.
So what happens if the adoptive parents live in a different state than I do?
Well, if the adoptive parents and you do not live in the same state, the first thing you need to consider is how they're going to be there at the time of birth. You're going to have to work out some notice to them and have an arrangement where either they come down earlier or they get notified in the middle of the night by a phone call from you that you're in labor, and then they get on the first plane. So that's the first logistical challenge when you're not living close together. Now there's the legal aspect also. When you're crossing state lines, there's a program called the Interstate Compact that is there to protect the child's interests. So there's a sending state, that's where you are and where you'd give birth, and there's a receiving state, and that's where the adoptive parents reside. So balancing everybody's interests out, the sending state says, okay, receiving state, it's okay for us to let this baby go because the birth mother has signed the appropriate legal documents in this state, so there won't be a legal challenge later. And the receiving state says basically, we have reviewed the home study that the adoptive parents have, they appear to have a fit home, and they'll be required to file a petition in the court immediately upon returning home, so it's okay to send them. So as a practical matter, the baby generally is discharged within an hour of your discharge, and in a vaginal delivery, that might be, let's say, on the second day after you deliver. So the baby gets discharged to them, but until they have the ICPC, the Interstate Compact clearance to come back to their home, they have to stay there in your state. So they might be there 3 to 5 days. It could even be longer than that while the clearance is obtained. But basically, there's really no problem, and it doesn't concern how you relinquish your rights or what you do at the hospital. It's just a procedure to guarantee that it's safe to transfer the baby between two states.
So how long will it be before I meet the adoptive parents?
You will meet the adoptive parents starting with couple number one, and there may only be couple number one, but you'll start tomorrow. There's not a long delay. The educational, counseling, screening process, all of that happens today. Hopefully you'll get a good night's sleep, and we'll start first thing in the morning, and you'll meet a couple tomorrow.
Will I be alone when I'm meeting the adoptive parents?
Well, there are two parts to the meeting. The first part is more of an organized part where a member of the staff, it'll be Durand or somebody else, will be there to help facilitate that. It runs about an hour, and there's some questions we make sure that are asked where information's put on the table. And so you'll have a pretty good idea of who these people are, statistically at least, before you end up going to lunch with them. And they'll take you to lunch, and our team doesn't go to lunch. So there'll be a part of the meeting where it's facilitated and a part of the meeting where you'll be able to go wherever you want with your questions and answers.
Can your office help me find a doctor?
We can not only help you find a doctor, but we can help you find a counselor or anybody else professionally in your neighborhood that you're going to need to interact with during the course of the adoption. We're here as a resource tool for you, even if our office is not close to where you live.
When do I sign the relinquishment of my rights?
You sign documents transferring your parental rights after you give birth to your child. When? Depends on what state you're going to finalize the adoption in, but they definitely have to be signed after you give birth to the child and under the requirements of the state where the adoptive parents reside.
At what point do I transfer my parental rights to the APs?
So we just talked about, when you could sign your relinquishment or consent documents, but that doesn't always mean that you've transferred at that point your parental rights to the adoptive parents. It means that you've signed a document that is part of the process, but certain state laws give you a chance to think about it for 72 hours. Other laws would give you a chance for a week to think about it. And in California, you would have 30 days to think about it. So the actual transfer of your parental rights, again, depends on local state law, but your act usually, and signing, usually happens within 72 hours of your giving birth.
What will the birth certificate of my child say?
Your child is going to actually have two birth certificates. One will be created at the time of birth at the hospital. The other one will be created when the adoption is final and the judge transfers officially your parental rights. The difference between the two birth certificates, the one at the hospital will have your last name. The final birth certificate will have the adoptive parent's last name. So it's interesting to note that the hospital will give you some options when you're there. We know your last name is going to be on that original birth certificate. But you could ask the adoptive parents, what names, first and middle name that they would like to have on the birth certificate. And if they tell you, you can pass it on to the hospital clerk. Or you could just leave it blank and they'll put baby boy, baby girl with your last name.
What financial help can I get throughout my pregnancy?
Again, with regard to financial help, it does vary state to state. There are states that do not allow you to have any financial help. Very, very few of those. There are other states that will limit the amount of help that you can receive. And then there are the majority of the states that will allow you to receive necessary and reasonable expense help during your pregnancy. So for example, if you're unable to work because of your pregnancy and you have rent and utilities and your normal expenses, those are things that the adoptive parents can assist you with up through birth and a normal recovery period. What you need to know is that the law in every state is very clear that no one can make any kind of a gift to you with relationship to the adoption process. And it probably makes sense if you think about it, because a gift would be, influencing you perhaps to separate yourself from your unborn child. And no law is going to permit that. And no adoptive parents that I work with anyway would ever want to separate you from that unborn child. And money should not be an issue at all. So no gifts to you, although it's not supposed to be any out-of-pocket expense for you either. Help is usually available for most birth mothers in most states, but it does have to be checked state by state.
After I've chosen parents for my unborn child, what kind of communication should I anticipate?
Well, let's talk about communication then in two categories. One, after you meet them prior to your delivery, and then the second category would be, what agreement do you have in the future for the next 18 years while your child's growing up in the adoptive parent's home? Let's start with the second one. The second one is really up to you and the adoptive parents to work through. We're here to guide you, give you suggestions, give you feedback on what other arrangements that are successful have been, what they look like, but it's really up to you all to decide. I'll just give you an example. So if you think that after you've made the choice that it would be reassuring for you from time to time to receive a letter update and a picture that you've made the right choice, then that would be something that you could ask for. Most adoptive parents don't feel like that's invasive. If you want more than that, then that's something that really you should, one, let us know so we make sure that you're meeting couples that are open to that. But two, it's something you should really speak openly to the adoptive parents about so that it's very clear as you move forward in your relationship post-birth. Okay, now what kind of communication between the day you meet them and the day that you give birth? So we've traded, let's just say hypothetically, we've discussed this, that we've traded phone numbers, and we've traded email addresses. A lot of times people text with each other. And so the typical traditional way of communicating should happen on no less than a weekly basis, so that you find yourself feeling close to each other like you did the day of the match. So when the delivery comes, you should feel the same basic closeness, so that when you're together, that you're all a team supporting each other through the process. Well, maybe that's enough questions for now. There's a lot of information that we've passed to you already, but please know that we're a team here, and we're here to answer your questions all day today or through the entire process. So let me just speak to you for just a moment about your commitment. Having done this now for a number of years, what I've learned is that if you ask a birth mother what her maybe biggest fear is, it would be, it might not be yours, but for many, it would be the fear that someone would knock on your door 18 years from now, and you'd open the door and they would say, "Why did you do this? Why didn't you keep me?" And the answer basically is, for most birth moms, I did this out of love. I loved you enough to make a sacrifice. So I encourage you to be close enough to your adoptive parents to tell them exactly why you're doing this, so they can pass this on to your child as those 18 years pass. And look forward to meeting you in person shortly, I hope. Thanks for listening.
I know that there's a lot of information that you're trying to absorb today. We want you to know that we're available to answer any questions, address any concerns you might have. Enjoy the rest of your day here in sunny California.